Well, thanks for doing this, Jim.
Well, thank you. Are we recording?
Yeah, we're recording now.
All right. Okay.
All right. Well, before we get started with the boxing stuff, with everything that's going down in Charlotte, what do you think's going on?
I think that it fits right into what's been called the anarcho-tyranny model of governance, where you have an empire that's kind of fading, which the whole Western world is. The economy is in turmoil. Our rate of technological change is greater in 10 years than what used to happen in 200 years. So there's a lot of social shock. And there's a professor 20 years ago, I think he's some European guy, I don't even know his name, sounded like a French name to me, came up with this theory of anarcho-tyranny. If you're in trouble politically with your base, what used to be your base, like when you let people in America know that America was all about white people, so you get these white people to take the red people's stuff for you. Once that gets into trouble, you could do what the Roman emperors used to do, which was threaten the Senate with the mob. Because in Rome, you had no employed people. They literally all lived on the dole. They would go to the circuses, the bread and circuses thing. Well, they would go to the circuses and they would go to the arenas to see the gladiator combats, not just to get bread, but to get meat. The only meat they ever ate was from the animals that were killed in the arena, and many of these animals had been fed criminals and gladiators that couldn't afford to pitch in for a funeral club. They would get fed to the lions and stuff too, and then the people eat the lions. So the correlation would be, imagine today the NBA, if at halftime at your NBA game, you would have maybe criminals fed to pit bulls. Okay. And then once these pit bulls, grow up and they're all beastly and everything, then at another halftime in another game, you'd have some rodeo guy come out and kill the pit bull, and then on the sidelines you got a butcher cutting the meat up and somebody else cooking it, and then the meat is being handed on sticks to the people in the audience, and you're essentially eating the animals that you saw eat people, like at the last event. And there was a guy that wrote a book, the title was The Sorrow of the Ancient Romans, which went into this whole death cult that the Romans had, and it was at the core of the Roman emperor keeping power over the elite, that he could unleash this entire mob of starving people just by not throwing the games, just by not saying, okay, we're going to have the gladiator fights next month. He could say, no, I don't like the way the Senate's treating me, so because the Senate's being bad, you people aren't going to get to eat meat, and your bread dough is going to be cut in half, and you're not going to get to see rich guys kill each other, so have fun with that. And then of course, the senators were terrified of that, because then these people would be ripping them apart. Each one of these senators is surrounded by at least 100 slaves, so they'd be willing to pile on to look the other way. So I think ideally, if you want to take power away from a group of people that form the majority of your population, the weirdest thing about the United States of America is that the government represented the majority of the population for most of its history until the mid-1960s.
Yeah.
Now, that's bizarre. That's unusual. If you look at ancient nations, what you see, something like Rome, where you've got 4 slaves to every free person. Something like Athens, where there's only 25,000 free people and everybody else is a slave. And the government represents the elite minority who is in league with the rank and file minority, and they're all over top of the masses. And usually the masses do all the producing. In medieval Europe, that's all it was. You would have a few lords, you have less than 5% of the population terrorizing and extracting wealth from the base of the population. Now, with open resources, if you wipe out these Indians and the white people who were living with the Indians, because you had a lot of runaway white people who had to live with them, if you wipe those people out, you have these massive resources that you can convert. And if you tell these people that the country is all about them, it's about white people and all white people are the same and they're better than everybody, well, that's a way of getting these working class white people to do what the rich white people want to do. Now, once you run out of land, immediately what's happened? The 3 years after the Indian Wars end, we're manufacturing a war with Spain. So we take all this Spanish stuff. Now we're an imperial power, and we're adventuring around the world taking resources. Finally, in the last couple decades, we've gotten to the point where we're not going to have any more military bases. We got our 931 military bases, that's it. Antarctica is not productive. We're not going to take that. We're not going to the moon. So we have static resources to exploit in the United States. So now you have to take the majority and you have to subject them to the elite instead of letting them think that they're part of the elite. So you break that racial identity thing up. And now you have this group of people, 13% of the population, who you let the majority terrorize for 100 years. And now they're the martyrs from the old order that survived. And if you're the elite, so now you see the natural alliance where you have this small criminal class that's been cultivated by these elite people. And the elite people are aligned with the criminal class against the working class and the middle class. And you just use them to hit the working class over the head. As far as the middle class, you afflict them with guilt, and then you suck money out of the bottom of the economy. You have it given to the people in the criminal class, and since they have very corporate friendly spending habits, which I knew from being a grocery store guy, you could sell Sunny Delight to these people instead of having to actually squeeze a real orange. Yeah. And it's a value-added product. You make a much bigger profit out of it. That all goes directly up to the big corporate organizations, ConAgra, Archer Daniel Midlands, and all that kind of stuff. It's been daunting, especially since the people have been able to avoid the brainwashing. Have been people who haven't gone to college, and they've gotten into a trade. These people are being replaced by people from other countries who can do this construction work.
Yeah.
All right. These are the people that put this guy in office. Who they thought was going to save them from having their jobs taken by cheaper imported people. So these are the people that woke up, and a lot of them have written me. I had 2 guys that emailed me. Actually, one emailed me. One guy called me and thanked me for talking them out of going to the Charlotte rally because I just thought it was stupid. It's been these violence parades where you've got violent people on the left attacking people on the right who actually think they have rights. They're still buying into the Founding Fathers mythology. Yeah. And the police have been watching the people on the right being attacked. And naturally what this is going to do is it's going to get the people on the right to amp up and say, you know what, we're going to fight back. And that's what the authorities are waiting for. In this situation we had in Baltimore with the riots, you had the authorities tell the police to stand down, and then these criminals just spread out and attacked regular people. So in any case, when you see, in the future, when you see the government tell the police to stand down, that means that the criminal class and the left-wing activists have the upper hand and they're attacking. In any event in the future where you see the government tell the police to go out and take action, that means they think that people on the right, who are people who actually have the ability to run something and make it work, they need to be put down. You can elevate the criminal class all you want, and as long as you do this wonderful job of depriving them of a meaningful education, which has been done by public schools, then they're never going to be able to run anything. So they're still going to be dependent on you. You can't let working people elevate themselves, especially people to access their own sources of education. And what works really good with this is any police officer is conditioned to arrest the successful aggressor. Most criminal aggressions are successful. Usually when a cop shows up, it's traditionally been a crook beating up some innocent person. Sometimes it's a fight between 2 idiots, but most aggressions are successful. Most aggressors are criminals. So you have this long indoctrination of police work where the successful aggressor is typed as the criminal. He's also threatening the government's monopoly of force, and the figurehead for that monopoly of force is the police officer. He's supposed to be the one that projects force for the good, not the individual citizen. I've interviewed guys recently who have been rudely shoved aside by cops while they were in the process of rescuing somebody, and the cops did nothing to rescue them because they had to break up the engagement. and they have to stop successful aggression. That's what a police force is supposed to do. They're supposed to restore order, not pick sides and say, well, this guy is justified and this guy's not. Who's ever having success, when the police officer shows up, they're the one that has to be stopped. Okay. And the fact that these white nationalist guys and the alt-right guys didn't realize that once they finally got enough guys together that these Antifa people weren't going to be able to beat them up, and the BLM people weren't going to be able to beat them up, and they turned the tables. They thought the cops were still going to stand there and watch like they had watched when the left was doing it. But these people on the left were known to be ineffective aggressors. You get a bunch of guys that went to college and have muscles and they're organized, and they're beating up people. The cops are not going to stand and watch that, especially if they've been already targeted at you and they've been told. As far as the helicopter accident,
I think that was just complete accident.
I'm going to say that it's got to be deep state. It's got to be one of our intelligence agencies has said, we've killed 2 South American presidents doing this. This is the crackpot thing, okay?
Okay.
All right? This is, Corey does not agree with this. I'm spouting this off there.
Okay.
But look, the first time that law enforcement actually clashes with any of these alt-right people, the very first time you lose 2 of these guys by an accident. Well, just about every Marine aviator who has piloted Marine One has died. Anybody that's piloted Marine One, when the Clintons were on board, that person has ended up dead in an accidental crash. Whew. Okay, you can see the stuff on YouTube. Okay, I'm not pulling this out of my hat. If you look at the guy that wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, he had discussions with 2 different South American or Central American heads of state. He shook hands with them and he said, please, take the deal I'm offering you. And he wasn't going to say, otherwise they send the jackals in. But he was hoping the person would take the deal because he's the carrot, not the stick. Well, the stick is the jackals who work for the CIA. And their favorite way of killing people is just making sure when you take off, if you don't take the deal you're supposed to take, instead of having Al Pacino watch you get tossed out of a helicopter, something just goes wrong with it. Okay, so I would bet, okay, if I had to bet my life on it, I would bet that somebody in one of our federal intelligence agencies did something to cause those 2 police officers to lose their job so that they would forever separate white identity politics from law enforcement.
Okay.
Okay, that's my supposition. I have no proof for that. Okay. But if you're a U.S. Marine aviator, make sure you never ferry a Clinton anywhere. Okay, you'll end up being in an accident.
Oh wow,
it's ridiculous. There's a guy that did a video on the Clinton hit list, and I think most of it is just guesswork that's wrong.
Okay.
He's got I think it was 134 was the last count of bodies that you could trace to these people. And you know what? If only 1.3 of them is right, there's still some pretty bad people. But on this list were all these Marine aviators that had operated Marine One for these people and then mysteriously died in these crashes of the Osprey and other non-fixed wing aircraft. After they were no longer working as the pilots for these people. So look that up. Maybe you could link to that on your site and say, I don't believe this. I think this is terrible, but this crackpot that I interviewed thought that had some veracity.
I mean, to put some credibility to the Antifa thing, I mean, when I was out in Portland, it was right after the extremist right-wing guy stabbed those 2 people on the train. Yeah, I mean, and then you had the protest that happened right after I left Portland. And I was seeing Antifa posters everywhere saying that they're going to be training to beat these right-wing extremists and bullshit.
They had that one MMA guy, the Snowman, was working with them.
Snowman.
He did time or got fined for doing this graffiti stunt on a national monument in D.C. And a judge actually convicted him. His fight name was the Snowman. He's basically a ground fighter that was in MMA and was competing 10 years ago at a pretty high level. Munson. His name's Munson. He was like one of the guys training these Antifa people to fight. I saw a video 5 years ago, I think it was 5 years ago, of four, guys that were into, a white identity movement sitting in a diner discussing poetry and history and stuff like that, and a whole bunch of Antifa people with hammers came in and beat them up, and and the guy fought them all. So these are college people. I saw Jared Taylor getting bullied by a whole bunch of these people when he was invited to a debate, and a bunch of goons show up and start pushing him around. So this politics with these people trying to convince people who are unconvincible. I mean, you have people so far to the left and right of each other supposedly having a discussion. Well, nobody's going to change their mind or come to the middle, and it obviously eventually was going to get into this violence. As far as I know, the guy on the train was not politically affiliated with anybody. He was, the only thing Christian about him was his name.
Yeah.
He was just some nut. But it's just too easy. Look, if you look at who the bad guy is in every horror movie since you were a little kid, he's a white guy.
Yeah.
Okay? So just with that, and who are these horror movies made to scare? They're made to scare upper middle class white people. That's who they're made to terrorize. And the bad guy is always this rural working class white guy. Always. And that type of conditioning, once you put that in the thought stream, it doesn't take much to just tack a word onto somebody and call them a Nazi or whatever, and then all that imagery is going to come to the fore. The last time 3 guys tried to mug me at night on Harford Road, when I didn't go for it, I didn't step off to the side and get mugged like they wanted me to. I put my hand in my pocket on the steel pipe that I had in my pocket instead. They called me a bitch-ass Nazi, which I thought was ingenious because they didn't have to divert grammatically at all, really, from what they called each other. They just changed the ending of the third word. And that's the first thing out of their mouth. I doubt very much if any of these guys have seen a World War II documentary, have read any books on World War II, even know what a Nazi or National Socialist party member was or anything. But Nazi's just something that you could throw on any white person that is going to stand up for themselves, and it's a way of, okay, now they're a monster.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with my roommate who's a black woman who was attacked by white men. They were white teenagers when she was a kid because she was with a white guy. And that's the only time that she ever suffered aggression from white people, but it happened at a formative age. And it gelled together with everything she was fed in the media, because she's my age, and every TV show. If you look at all the cop TV shows, when I'm out at my mother's or when I'm at Megan's, and they're watching their cop shows, every bad guy is a white guy. You could have 20 serial killers, and 20 of them are white men that are the serial killers. This is, people even believe that only white men are serial killers. Many people have that opinion, that the only serial killers are white men, and that the first serial killer was H.H. Holmes, when in fact it was a brother who killed like 42 people with an axe before that. So this kind of stuff is actually put in the thought stream by the people at the top of the society that used to be the old slave owning class, and they used to play the poor white people off against the poor black people. And it's just been extended into the modern day, and it's in all the movies and comic books and everything.
Yeah, now that I think about it, the only female serial killer, and she was still white, was that one, I can't remember her name. She was a prostitute, and she just killed her Johns for a while.
Oh, that was a chick that Charlize Theron played her. That was a prostitute in Florida.
Yeah.
There were a couple of ladies that ran houses for like old people that were earlier serial killers, going all the way back to the 20s and the 30s, because women were usually killed by poisoning and stealth and things like that, and they'll tend to pick on children and the elderly.
Yeah, that's the only other example that I can think other than white men that I know of. There might be others.
You've got to be a serial killer geek to actually find it. Now, in reality, we've got 100 serial killers running around Baltimore right now. According to Baltimore City Police, there's between 130 and 140 trigger pullers that they will guarantee you have killed at least one person.
Wow, yeah.
Okay, and they're free. They're out there. They know who they are, but they don't have evidence to convict them. Well, how many of those 130 guys killed 3 people? That's the qualification.
Okay.
I mean, the dude that gunned down 4 people at the end of the truce last weekend. Well, that's that's a mass murder according to the definition.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like, wow. It's so fucked up in this city. It really is.
Yeah, and I was always proud of it. I was always kind of proud of the fact that I'm part of this group of people that's considered the most deadly people in the world.
Oh yeah.
You know, but that gets used against you in a case like this.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I mean, plus you make your living off writing about this stuff. So
and earlier this year and last year, 2 of the last 3 incidences of oppressed individuals being shot by white cops, they were shot by Latino cops who didn't identify as white, but the press identified them as white. And that's a sticky thing because, I mean, realistically, unless they're from Spain, most Latino people are mixed.
yeah.
With one group or another. So, that's, again, it's to vilify this cop, you've got to also make him white.
Wow. Yeah.
Most Baltimore City cops, I think it's by a couple percentage points, are black now.
Yeah. In fact, yeah. In talking with my dad the other day, since he's a Baltimore City police officer, yeah, most of the police in the city are black.
Yeah, and if you talk to black dudes like Oliver, the boxer I trained that lived over in Park Heights, he was attacked on one occasion, and he called the police, and he was terrified because a black female cop, now he's a black man that was born in Jamaica, okay, a black female cop and a black male cop showed up, and he was terrified. And they immediately tried to get him to incriminate himself, tried to get him to admit that he committed some kind of crime, and he called them because somebody was trying to break into his house. So their immediate thing is, what are you trying to run an insurance scam, or what is this? Right, and that's the fear that most of the black people that I've known, and I've worked with as many black people as white people, they would rather have a white cop respond than a black cop.
Whew.
And it's the same thing with, when I used to run that supermarket, my black supervisors would treat the black employees terribly. It was terrible. The white supervisors I had under me were the guys that the black dudes wanted to work for because they were more fair. They wanted to work with a guy like Pete. They didn't want to work with the other guy. So it's a common thing, and I think that just goes back to the fact that when these people were held in slavery, they were played off against each other, and that habit just stayed in the culture.
Okay.
Because it's been encouraged since then. You had, during slavery in the South, the last ad I can find for runaway white slaves in the South is 1835. I did find an account of one white girl who was owned in New Orleans in 1838. They got a dream team together to free this girl from slavery, but she couldn't get her children free because her master bred her with a black man, and her daughters were half black, so they had to stay. But after you don't have these white so-called indentured servants anymore, and you just have slaves, and then you have the poor white people around there. The white people that are free can't get decent paid jobs because they're competing with men who own hundreds of people, and they have free labor and actually breed their own labor. They're competing with these people. If you were a poor white person that lived outside of the plantation gates, you had to do slave catching patrol. Sometimes every night in certain districts, you had to do slave catching patrol before you got up and you did the work in which you were in competition with that slave master that owned these 100 or 200 guys. This would be like today, having a rule that if you're in Aldi's grocery store and you're sharing a parking pad with a Walmart, that you had to round up Walmart shopping carts, even though that was your competitor. Okay? That's how it was set up. There were from 1704 to 1744, there were 5 minor wars between slave owners in Carolina. There was only one Carolina then. And the whites. that had run away or were in the process of running away, they mustered black militias. Had been 5 awards. These were documents that were given out to black slaves after they were put back in bondage after serving in these anti-white militias in the Carolinas. As soon as Reconstruction failed, first you had the whites in the North sick the blacks on the whites in the South after they won the war. Then, after Reconstruction fails, you have the rich whites in the South now playing the poor whites and the poor blacks off against each other. You had the same numbers as far as poverty and people stuck in sharecropping. You would have the same numbers amongst the poor whites as you had amongst the blacks.
Okay.
I mean, it was so all along from the beginning, from 1619, when they were selling boatloads of kids that had been kidnapped in the streets of London, and they were selling them side by side with some blacks they brought up from Barbados. The whole political structure in the U.S. has been playing different races off against each other. The white people in charge played the different races off against each other, and that's what they've always done. Yeah. So they had all these people thought that America was about white people, or at least their fathers thought that, and they thought that was being taken away from them. Well, things are just going back to the way they should be, which is the elite used the minority to control the majority. So politics in America have reversed for that reason. The ancient Athenians did it. They used Scythian barbarian policemen to police their own people. And the ancient Egyptians did it. They used Sudanese, black Sudanese police to collect taxes and police the white Egyptians. Okay. You just want to play these opposite races off against each other. So I think that thing in Charlotte was that coming to a head where the government's wishes that law enforcement, which was a big danger because law enforcement was kept in line with white people for a long while, they want to separate law enforcement from white identity people. And if you can do that for the next 10 years, you're going to find out that the majority of police officers around the country are not white and are also not American nationals. In New York right now, you have Turkish and Nigerian cops. We've even got African cops in Baltimore that aren't citizens yet.
Wow. Yeah, I know for a while they were recruiting from the Dominican Republic for a while, Baltimore City Police.
If you want an effective police force, that's what you want.
Okay.
You don't want indigenous people in your police force. You want outsiders. When blacks were first being recruited to work in factories in the North at the beginning of the 20th century, these same people like Ford, who used a lot of black employees, they went down south and they recruited whites from the South to come up and act as police, specifically to police the blacks in the North that they were moving north.
Okay.
You know, if anytime you can have a police force that's not indigenous, that's not drawn from the population you're policing, it's going to be a more effective police force.
Wow. Okay.
In terms of oppressing the population.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of investigating crimes, it's going to be less effective.
True. Yeah.
Okay, but you've already, the investigation barrier, that's really still there.
Okay. Wow.
You know, try to get a witness to a murder in West Baltimore.
Yeah, that's a tough sell right there.
Right. So anyways, that's my crackpot take on that.
All right. Well,
I only half believe that the 2 cops were killed by CIA agents, but I think it's slightly more likely than that they screwed up. It's probably not the first time they went out in that chopper.
Yeah, I mean, I have a cousin that's the state police medevac chopper, and yeah, he's in that thing all the time. So I hope he doesn't crash. I really don't want
Well,
to
there
crash.
probably a couple of nice federal agents showed up and said, hey guys, you know, this is going to be a long day up there. How about if we make sure we check your equipment and everything, make sure it's all functioning?
I'll make sure I give him the warning. I mean, he can fly, but he's technically the onboard medic. But it's like, really, don't mess with the medic. You need him to save your life. Okay. Well, let's take a hard left turn right here.
Okay. That's a Bill Clinton.
All right. So.
Sorry about dragging you through the dirt there.
I know, it's fine. I like that type of stuff. So your book series, The Broken Dance, it's basically a whole history of boxing, essentially, right?
Yes.
Okay. Going from, I believe, ancient Egypt or further back?
Further back, I actually started in prehistory trying to trace everything I could. It's 4 volumes. The 4th one's not complete. So the first boxers, the gods of boxing, all power fighting. Right now I'm working on the boxer dread, and I'll probably be working on it for a couple of years. All power fighting is not in print yet. It's just in e-form. These books, since I think they'll sell steadily over the years, I gave them to my niece Jamie to publish, and she's doing a nice job. She's photoshopping every interior illustration so that they're nice and clear and everything, and they look a lot nicer than my crappy books that I publish myself through the same format, because she knows how to build a cover and I don't.
Okay.
But the origin, as far as I could tell, if you look at the origins of boxing forms around the world, you see very few boxing forms originated. There's nothing that we can find in the Americas as far as a fist fighting ritual. There's evidence that at least one Florida Indian knew how to punch, because he punched Hernando Soto while they were having a meeting. But using your hand to hit another person that's part of your social group in the face has been taboo in most cultures, specifically among Indo-Europeans. There was an idea of the taboo hand that had something to do with some knowledge god that's illustrated with this very elongated hand that reaches out.
Okay.
And aside from 2 Polynesian islands and Okinawa, we don't and Kung Fu in China. There's these Asian martial arts geeks debate over where that came from all the time, but I would think that it's indigenous and it didn't come from India. You've got 3 or 4 instances in all of Asia of boxing showing up. In the Americas, you've got nothing. You've got nothing in Australasia. There's nothing there. It doesn't show up in Europe anywhere until you see the chariot. You never see boxing. You never see ritual fist fighting forms until you see the chariot, which is an indication that it probably was an Indo-European ritual, which makes sense if you think about the taboo hand. The idea that drawing the blood of your tribe member is taboo. Using your empty hand to strike him in the face is taboo. Using your empty hand to strike an enemy is just stupid, because you should be running him through with a spear.
Yeah.
If you look at how long you go with established wrestling traditions and warfare before you come up with something like boxing, it's really weird, because you have the first illustration of wrestling is 20,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The first illustration of warfare comes from about the same period in Europe and France, about 24,000 years ago, I think. The first illustration of boxing is only 1,700 years BC.
Okay.
So it's 85% younger than wrestling,
Yeah.
as far as the evidence of it. The significance of it being involved, it seems to have been a ritual conducted almost exclusively in the Near East and the Balkans, which would be Crete, Greece. There's some indication that the Hittites, also Indo-Europeans, boxed. And you have in Mesopotamia, you have a Babylonian boxing tradition that I found some evidence of. It doesn't seem that strong. Those are all elite warrior class people boxing. They would have been people that would have used chariots for mobility. I think the significance of that, I'll address the Egyptian boxing separately because it might have a separate origin. The significance of the elite warriors that used chariots for mobility, because they didn't fight out of the chariot. They would dismount.
Yeah.
Pretty much what you saw in Troy as a battle taxi. The Sith chariots came later. That was a much later invention. And the use of chariots to deploy archers what was another thing.
Yeah.
Okay, but you see the boxing associated with hand-to-hand chariot-borne warriors. So it could have developed as a preparatory ritual, something that they did that was like dueling.
Okay.
It's obviously, boxing is obviously, from a mechanical fighting perspective, it's a compromise between wrestling, which is unarmed, and dueling.
Yeah.
And if you think about that, wrestling makes a whole lot of sense for taking care of in-group problems,
Yeah.
so you're not killing your own people.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense. We don't see boxing when we have first stage in-groups. You don't see clans boxing. You don't see bands boxing.
Mm-hmm.
You only see boxing when you get to multi-tribal states.
Okay.
So my theory, and it's just a theory, is that you don't see boxing until you have chariot warriors, because now dueling is now a mode of warfare, and at least on the elite level, and boxing to a duelist is a very useful ritual. And you also don't see it until these chariot civilizations established these cities that are multi-tribal. There were 10 or 12 tribes in Athens. There were 2 or 3 tribes in each of the smaller Greek city-states. So you have different tribes living in the same city. I would suggest that boxing would be a sensible ritual to be intertribal. And that's how it emerged again. In America, you'd have Irish guys fighting English nativist Americans. Yeah. You would have, at the turn of the century, you had boxers were sponsored by gangs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it goes good with in an urban environment where you still have tribal structures or substructures. Boxing makes a lot of sense. It's a lot better than killing each other. In the between 1200 and 1400 in northern Italy, there was a priest who promoted boxing, which he got out of books, out of the ancient Greco-Roman records, as a way to get these different factions in Venice and other northern Italian cities from not having these lethal stick fights on these bridges. They would do that in Venice for one thing, but rather to have boxing matches. Alfred the Great promoted boxing, 970s I think to 990s in England. He was like a Renaissance guy, and he wanted his Saxon soldiers, Anglo-Saxon soldiers, to fight and practice with each other. Wanted them to wrestle and box like the ancients did, because he had been taught how to read classics, so he would read about the wrestling and boxing matches in the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Okay.
So you can see where, again, it kind of makes sense. And then in Great Britain, in the late 1600s, the king has a boxing ring set up, which was a fencing stage, but so this boxing ring comes from the fencing stage from England, but it was set up for the express purpose so that his officers wouldn't kill each other in duels, that they would box with each other instead. So your first boxing champion is a fencing champion, James Figg.
Okay.
He wins the first boxing championship by a standing armbar.
Oh, wow.
In 1727.
Wow. Well, it makes sense that you wouldn't want your officers, which you've trained so much, to kill each other, because you need them to fight other people.
Oh, so in a 100-year period, some historian counted up something like 40,000 French fatalities in duels between aristocrats. And in that society, all of these guys are officers. That's all they did. When you have the early modern monarchies, they pretty much broken the nobility. So to keep them happy, they let them do what they like to do, which is fight. So you'd have the nobility would serve as the officer corps in your army.
Okay.
And that continued all the way up through the 1900s. And it was a disaster to have these guys running each other through whenever they weren't out on campaign.
Oh, wow. In a way, it still happens to a certain extent in today's militaries. I mean, the more education you have, like if you have the ability to go to West Point, which is mostly elite people. I mean, there are people like me that would get into West Point, but they're few and far between because they need, like, senatorial recommendations. I know because I looked into going to those places. and even though I'm an Eagle Scout, I still wouldn't be able to go in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that.
Well, the Naval Academy, the U.S. Naval Academy's got the best equipped gym, boxing gym on the East Coast.
Oh yeah, I've seen it. It's nice.
Yeah, so that's an indication right there. Boxing's a valuable ritual for training people to keep their cool when things aren't going well.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. It's fun punching someone.
I found a record of a chimpanzee punching a baboon.
Okay.
Okay, so it's something that primates can do. Even subhuman primates seem to be able to do this. It's, like I said, it's really unusual in history. You can follow boxing traditions down to a few narrow sources. Most societies never developed a boxing tradition. All societies, as far as I've been able to tell, had some type of dueling tradition and some type of wrestling tradition. And the societies that developed the first boxing traditions were intensely militaristic. They were elitist. And like I said, they all used these chariots. The Cretans and the Egyptians were two weird examples. The Egyptians may have had their own indigenous boxing form that developed out of stick fighting.
Okay.
Okay, because you see ordinary soldiers stick fighting and boxing. And in their boxing, they were actually allowed to do finger spears to the eyes. Their sticks were made out of these bound up reeds, which probably could have been pretty nasty and were probably whippy.
Yeah,
it's almost like a practice sword. And they did hammer fists, they did thumb jabs to the eye, and they did spear hands to the eye. So, if there's a possibility that Egypt had its own tradition, but even though there's wrestling and stick fighting, 2000 BC in Egypt, there's no boxing at that period. First boxing does not show up in Egypt until after the Hyksos invasion, which is when the chariots showed up out of the Near East. And this is also after their very close cultural and military alliance with a nation of, it wasn't a nation, with at least one of the city-states, the palatial mini-states on Crete. Like Knossos. And there's a lot of evidence of boxing in Crete all the way back to 1700 BC. And since you don't see any boxing in Egypt until after they had a close relationship, until after they also brought in the same type of chariot warfare that the Cretans did. The Cretans actually used chariots that were like, I remember used to be able to, for $50 out of surplus catalogs, you could buy a Jeep, a U.S. Army surplus Jeep that had never been used because they were left over after World War II, and they didn't need that many of them to be put together for the Korean War. And it would come packed in a crate in Greece, and you could put this thing together yourself.
Wow.
Okay, so they had the Mycenaeans, they would said Mycenaean, but the Mycenaeans and the Gnossians, they had this very light chariot that their language seems to have been devoted to inventorying their cargoes, that was designed to be taken apart and put on a ship. And it would look like those chariots you see in the movie Troy that aren't heavy-duty things. Two guys could stand on them. One of them is the driver. The other guy is the guy in the armor that they wheel around. At the time, the armor they're wearing is pretty heavy, so you don't want to have to walk to the fight if you don't have to.
Okay.
So if you're the aristocratic guy with a great suit of armor, and you show up to duke it out with your peers and then slaughter the lower orders who don't have any armor, you'd want to show up not tired. The regular dudes had to foot slog it all the way there, so it gives you even more of an advantage.
Oh yeah, I guess.
I think that in Crete they had this really hierarchical form of boxing that had 4 different forms. You have naked boxers wearing nothing, bare knuckles. They look like young dudes. Then you have armored boxers, boxing with gauntlets and helmets. Then you have these armored boxers with plumes on their helmets, boxing on the next level up. And then finally, You have boxers boxing with armored gauntlets, but no helmets, and they're wearing a diadem, which is the same thing that the king would have worn. And it seems like their kings were controlled by the priesthood, and they were not permanent kings.
Okay.
They would either have to fight to maintain their status, or they would just be eliminated somehow. And there were a lot of really strong Earth Mother tendencies to the Cretan religion. There's most of the boxing scenes are illustrated on these rhytons, which are these pitchers that look like vases.
Okay.
And they were filled with wine and opium by the priestesses who would dish this stuff out. And the priestesses had like the best outfits ever.
Oh yeah.
You know, it was like the push-up bra with no bra thing. You know, so you have your essentially your religious, your nuns or these ring card girls that are getting you stoned and drunk at the same time. That was just a weird society, and as far as I know, nobody's come close to figuring it out. But I think that there was some sacrificial element to that. There's this illustration of these two kids boxing. This is the last Cretan boxing illustration, and you'll see that one of their fists is not gloved, and the other one is. And this kid appears to be a slave because he's naked except for his equipment. And this kid appears to be an aristocratic kid, and he's also much more skilled than the slave kid. This looks like sacrificial boxing here. This is a painting on the wall in a room on the island of Santorini, which was called Thera. And it's the island that blew up and did a lot to take this civilization out. And this is one of the last pieces of arts that was put in there.
Okay.
So there's a sacrificial aspect to the Cretan boxing.
Yeah.
And when you look at all that, there are some traditions among the Greeks that the Olympic Games came from Crete.
Yeah.
Some of it came from Egypt. But there was a Hercules character. There's 3 prehistoric Hercules characters that they implicated in the foundation of the Olympics. One of them was from Crete.
Okay.
So there's some indication, at least in the classical Greece, that they believed that their 8-year cycle, the Olympic cycle, was originally 8 years, not 4 years. That came from Crete.
Okay.
So there could have been a sacrificial aspect to the boxing. You can't tell.
Wow. I mean, it makes sense with Crete because everything that I've read on Crete, there's almost a sacrificial element to everything they do.
It was a priestess-heavy culture too.
Okay.
I read Fraser's Golden Bow, and he has an account of this one African tribe, the Shilluk, I think is the name of it, who had a king for life as long as he could pleasure his many wives and as long as he could win any fights, any challenges that were laid against him by his sons. The only people who could challenge him were his sons. So if you think about this, Vander Holyfield would have been great for this.
Yeah.
This guy has dozens of wives. If he can ever not satisfy them sexually, they can go to the elders and have their complaint heard, and if their complaint's justified, he'll be ritually strangled by the tribal executioner because he symbolizes the health of the land, just like the rain symbolizes like the sky god's sperm. He symbolizes the health of the land. Then, if he lives long enough to have sons that are physically mature, he gets to look forward to the sons of his many jealous wives approaching him to have ritual combats. So this guy doesn't make it to 50.
Yeah.
Maybe if he's a Bernard Hopkins, he makes it to 48.
Yeah.
But when you look at things like that, you can see where a society where the women have a heavy voice, where there could be a forced turnover of the kingship that would actually be forced by either the priestesses or the wives, because the wives would go from being one of the many wives of the king to being the mother of the king. And you can see that in some of the North African Muslim states, like Morocco, where the palace intrigue that would come with the turnover of power of choosing a new sultan or unseating the old sultan, a mother of one of the sultan's sons would play heavily in all of these things.
Wow, that's a lot to take in.
Yeah. Sounds like a good time. It's better than an
Oh yeah,
election, don't you think?
it's a good time, yeah. But
Yeah, so instead of ritually killing our king every 8 years or making him fight some young stud that he has no chance of fighting because every priestess in the temple was getting him drunk and banging him on the run up to the fight. I mean, that's an easy fight to fix when you think about it.
Oh, yeah.
If the young dude is challenged and doesn't get access to any of the priestly companionship until after he wins the fight, and the guy that he's challenging is basically, living like Big Ron delivering pizzas. He doesn't have a chance. That's a very losable fight.
yeah.
That's much better to me than, we essentially had this 8-year presidential cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's better than that.
True. Plus, be interesting.
It's good, and you think about it, elections are decided by the stupidest people. Okay, because they're going to be the people most susceptible to advertising.
True.
So whatever candidate represents the idiots always wins.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if your head of state is chosen by the most brilliant, scheming, diabolical people in the country, like you had with the ancient Cretans and other societies, well then they might be able to make a better choice than the idiots. I don't know.
Yeah, at least you have a competent fighter in the White House.
Yeah, I think every president should be a fighter. So.
All right, that sounds good to me. At least you know that they'll be able to throw down when something happens.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, when you think about it, the Trump-Clinton bout would have been great.
Oh, God.
No, but she would have been able to nominate a male to represent her in combat. Right, so it would have been Bill versus Donald.
Oh, God.
That would have been great.
Now I'm thinking about it. I'm not sure who would win. Because you have Trump, who is...
I think he's a
bigger.
Dude.
He's a big dude,
yeah.
but he's also so out of shape. And then you have Clinton, who is like, well, he's thin as a rail now, but he's in shape, though. Kinda.
You know what? It could be a pick'em fight.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But I'd pay to watch that. I would pay to see Clinton versus Trump in a ring. And you know what? Give them gauntlets, too.
One thing we should suggest, Pancratian people and the guys that wrote the Encyclopedia of Martial Arts, Corcoran and this other fellow, I think they wrote it like 30 years ago. There's a theory that they recognized that since a lot of people think that Kung Fu came from Buddhist India, and that Alexander's army invaded the Indus area of India, that Pancratians somehow got into India and then got translated. Now, there is the only evidence I can find of military influence on the Indians from the Greeks is the kukri, which is based on the kopis. Okay.
Yeah.
But the Indians already remember, they had their Aryan invasion where they had the chariot guys coming in there 1700 BC at about the same time. According to, I think it was Arrian, one of Alexander's biographers, when they got there, the Indians were already having boxing matches. These would have been guys living in Afghanistan, and they were boxing for marriage rights.
Okay.
You'd have to go box a guy I don't think they were fighting over the same wife, but you would have to box one of the brothers of the bride or something like that, some kind of masculine ritual. So I don't see any reason why you have to say that, Kung Fu came from Pancratian. It doesn't make any sense to me, and it seems like wishful thinking.
Yeah, I mean, there could be some influence, but I think most of it was came from that particular area. And you can see fighting arts in every nation, really.
And if you think about it, if my theory about boxing and being spread by chariots is correct, at the same time that you had the chariot armies invading the Near East, Egypt, and Europe, they went into India and they went into China. And if you read records, it's all in poetics. I have a book of Chinese poems that goes all the way back to 400 BC, and they're describing their chariot warfare. And at the same time, the Scythian nomads, who were Caucasians, they were burying people right up by Lake Baikal in Mongolian territory. So, and you have a connection through that whole steppes corridor with the chariot technology.
Okay.
It was translated through that steppes corridor. It wasn't invented out there because, like the composite bow, the material that you needed for chariots was something that you had to get from a civilized setting. So it's about nomadic people using civilized technology that they got from border contact and developing a way to impose their will across the steppes corridor.
Okay.
And coming back and using what they got from the civilized people to conquer them.
Wow. Okay. I mean, the chariot theory makes sense. I guess we just need more archaeological evidence.
I have one illustration of a boxer in a chariot. It's from the Golden Bowl of Han San Wu.
All right.
And I'm sure we're butchering the pronunciation. I don't even know if I can pronounce right, but this is in you have this figure here.
Okay.
A Gilgamesh type figure. He's a kingly dressed man who's on Earth. He's boxing something like a chimera, a chimera. This is this lion crocodile with a chariot on its back with these wolf heads or something coming out of the back of the chariot. And there's a man mounted in this god chariot who's also boxing against a king, who's the earthly figure.
Yeah.
I actually use this for the cover for my Gilgamesh book.
Okay. Wow. And this is in your book, The First Boxers, right here. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, so basically all we talked about so far is about the... I started out The First Boxers with this. Take that and look at it. I did a photo study with the artist who illustrated the book, Joseph Belafato, did a superb job. That's how I used to be built. Okay.
Oh, yeah. I saw pictures.
Before you got me addicted to beer, and I got a beer belly, and that's
You're welcome.
Not your fault. Okay. And I showed all the different boxing postures from using the oblique posture as the axis and going all the way to two squared up and two lined up.
All right.
And I just used that as a tool to analyze. We also did hand orientations. Used it as a tool to analyze the postures that we find throughout the historical record.
Yeah.
And most of the boxing illustrations actually come from the latter period. It's slim evidence from more than 1,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So that was everything I could find in that book. And you can also see in the end of the book, I did a chapter on the Philistines.
Okay.
Which was, they were Hellenistic people and settled and converted to Judaism as the Danite tribe. The Egyptians called them the Denyen, and they were also the Dan in the Iliad. There's a illustration of these two guys dueling with straight swords, which was a thing that the straight swords were common in the early Iron Age because you didn't have good steel. You don't want to be going edge on edge with a wrought iron sword.
Yeah.
It's something that you want to thrust with.
Yeah.
Okay, and that looked a lot like boxing too. So it seems like the types of fighting where you use a small shield and a thrusting sword, they tend to lead to a boxing tradition. And those types of weapons seem to happen in certain areas. One, when you have the chariot, so you're not walking around this big shield on the chariot. And also when you have, when armor and stuff is going out of fashion, where you see boxing rise again during the Renaissance, where the only shields they're using are the little bucklers.
Oh, yeah.
You know, where you get swashbuckler from.
Huh. Oh, that's cool. All right. So let's kind of go from like ancient boxing to like more modern day, like within the past like 150 years.
Sure.
I mean, you know a lot more about this, but who would you say is probably like one of the best boxers of all time? Men.
best heavyweight boxer of all time. Well, of all time, it would be one of the ancient boxers.
Okay.
Okay. I'll do my list of best heavyweight boxers of all time.
All right.
I'm going to take Theogenes,
All right.
who actually won more pancratian matches than he did boxing matches.
Okay.
Theogenes means God-born. He was supposedly the son of Hercules, who took human form and impregnated his mother. He defeated Euthymus. Euthymus won 3 Olympic boxing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for 24, for 16 years, Euthymus was the top boxer, except when Theogenes decided to step out of the pancratian and box with him. He beat him, but he was so tired, it was a very close match, he couldn't compete in the pancratian, so he was no longer allowed to box in the Olympics because he had sinned against Zeus, and he had to pay to get a statue put up. So the next 2 Olympics, Euthymus won, which puts him tied for second place. So if you're looking at Olympic heavyweight boxing champions, you have Tisander of Naxos, which means greatest of men. He won 4 Olympic boxing titles in a row, and that's when the Olympics was the only game in town. That was the top of the pro game. You have Euthymus, won 3, but he was beaten by Theogenes. So I'd say Tisander's first. Theogenes is second. Euthymus, it was a close fight. Euthymus is tied for third with Teofilio Stevenson, who was a Cuban fighter who everybody wanted to see box Muhammad Ali, but he was a Cuban national and they didn't fight professionally back then. He won 3 Olympic boxing titles back when the Olympic boxing was still done without headgear, and it was the farm system for pro boxing, and he wasn't allowed to break out of it. So I would say Tisander, Theogenes, Euthymus, Teofilio Stevenson, and then Jack Johnson.
Okay.
Jack Johnson would be, because I'm looking at boxing as something that you could do also outside of the ring, maybe deal with somebody that's going to try to grab you. And most modern boxers are kind of helpless with that.
Okay.
I would have to say that Jack Johnson would be number 5. If we want to go just by modern heavyweights, Jack Johnson is number 1, without a doubt. The rest of it's pretty much a mess because you have these extreme types. You have the Dempsey, Marciano, Frazier, Tyson kind of boxers.
Yeah.
Okay, who go against the taller guys that are more skilled, that punch straight, like Gene Tunney, Muhammad Ali, the Klitschko brothers, and you have these epic matchups between them. My boxing coach, Mr. Frank, says that the best heavyweight boxer he ever saw was Joe Louis. If you think about it, Joe Louis is the guy that had the skill and the straight punching to get to somebody like Ali, and would also be able to KO and stand up and back up and set on the heels these shorter crouch fighters that come in, that actually do better against an Ali than they would do against a Joe Louis.
Okay.
So I would say Jack Johnson 1, Joe Louis would definitely get 2. I'd have to give Muhammad Ali number 3 because he also had a high level of competition. As far as who could beat the most other heavyweights, even though Ali made such short work of him, for most heavyweights, Sonny Liston's a nightmare.
Okay.
So I would put Liston at number 4, and because of the youth he did it in, I would have to make Mike Tyson 5.
Like this.
So Tyson's the only crouch fighter that I would put in the top 5 heavyweights.
Okay.
And really, I don't like doing a top 10 because after you get past the top 5, you end up getting bunches of guys together, you know.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at Dempsey, Tyson, Marciano, and Frazier, Tyson squashes all these guys because he's a heavier version.
Okay.
And that counts for a lot. So you run a tournament with those 4 guys against each other, they win. And then if you take the slick boxers and you put them together, Jack Johnson in his prime wins.
All right.
He was so much smarter than Ali, it wasn't even funny. This is a guy that did bullfighting. He could wrestle. He did bare knuckle fighting. He coached himself.
Okay.
And he literally toyed with people. And he didn't do it running away and calling them names. He would actually joke with them.
Okay.
You know, he would, Jim Jeffries' corner was calling him the N-word and saying all these terrible things about him. And his corner was James J. Corbett. And he just smiled. And he'd call his opponent, Jim Jeffries. He said, "Package being delivered, Mr. Jeff." And then he did it. And when the fight was over, Jeffrey said that there's no reason to have riots over this or to redo this fight.
Yeah.
Or say I was too old. He said because I was in the best shape of my life and I couldn't have beat Jack Johnson on my best day. And people don't understand what a war machine that Jeffries was. First of all, he's one of the fastest men of his time. He's an Olympic level sprinter. Okay, he wrestled with Olympic guys. He was incredibly tough. Nobody could knock him out except for Johnson. He once had pneumonia, and that was a death sentence back then before antibiotics. And he drank a case of whiskey and cured himself.
Whew.
He sat up from a Friday night to a Sunday night and drank a case of whiskey. And the doctor was of the opinion, if it doesn't kill you, it might kill the pneumonia. And it did. It killed the pneumonia, but not him. And so he's an incredibly tough, really superhuman guy who would have been heavy enough to fight as a heavyweight today because he would scale up around 220. And he fought in 20 to 40 round bouts. Okay, so he was that generation of fighter that Jack Johnson was part of that too, where you would have guys fighting 50 rounds. And they had a lot of good competition because boxing was the sport back then. All your best athletes were in it back then. Who knows who didn't box in the 1960s because they were in Major League Baseball, throwing pitches, or a quarterback in the NFL or in the NBA. You don't know, but there was none of that. You had baseball. Baseball was the number one sport back then when Jack Johnson was around, but it still wasn't the big money sport that boxing was. Yeah. Boxing was still. Babe Ruth and Jack Dempsey were friends in the 20s, but of course Johnson's a generation before that.
Okay.
You know, late 1800s, boxing was it. That was the sport where you made money.
Well, you still make a lot of money with boxing. I mean, I know with the Conor McGregor Mayweather fight, they're both due to get about $100 million each.
Yeah, something ridiculous.
It's insane. I mean, I know MMA's on its way up to being that high, but it still has ways to go to compete with boxing in terms of money.
Well, MMA has already crushed boxing in terms of overall money.
Well, overall money, right now.
Because with boxing, you got to realize that one guy makes more money than all the other boxers in the world in a given year.
Yeah, that's Mayweather.
I think right now you're still fighting for $300 if you're boxing on a local level as a pro.
Okay.
It's just ridiculous. It's criminal the way boxing is managed, and there is literally no money for anybody that's below the sponsorship level, which means you're such a prospect and you're at the right age that people are going to buy you. And they're going to put you up in a house. They're going to get you a coach and a nutritionist. They're going to pay your expenses, and then they're going to take a cut out of your earnings.
Yeah.
And they line you up with guys like Tony Saigon, who was an excellent boxer, but he had to work full time. He's working as an auto mechanic, and then he's got to go fight on Friday night. Okay, damn. So that's how you build a lot of these, and a lot of these boxing records are built in that fashion. Mm-hmm. So it's essentially illegitimate. It's why I like MMA as a sport. Where if I'm training a guy to box, I'd rather see him fight MMA.
Yeah. Well, plus with MMA, you can actually take a loss because you're pretty much expected to lose at least one match in your career.
Right. Well, there's too many ways to lose.
Yeah.
There's too many ways to win, too many ways to lose. In boxing, it's a much narrower skill set. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's been different forms of boxing. There's a way that McGregor and Mayweather could have a meaningful fight. They would have to fight under the London prize ring rules, which is basically sand shoe without kicks. It's boxing where you're allowed to throw the guy.
Yeah, I don't think Mayweather's going to let that happen.
Well, but if you think about it, if McGregor was allowed to throw Mayweather, then Mayweather wouldn't be able to rest in a clinch. He'd have to box. He would have to box at his best. I mean, because the whole idea behind boxing was it was a way to defeat a wrestler, that you couldn't wrestle. If you weren't as strong as him, you would defeat him boxing. So London prize ring rules still recognize that. Even in the early gloved era, you're allowed to hold each other and hit each other all day long if you wanted. And they would train with wrestlers. You know, Jack Johnson and Jeffries were in wrestling matches.
Okay.
You know, so that was important. The crop of fighters that Mayweather has been fighting, he's like 10 years older than most of them.
Yeah.
Around the early 1990s, clinching was totally outlawed in amateur boxing. And this is where your boxers are manufactured. This is where they're brought up and trained. The last time I was at the Lochraven Boxing Club and Mr. Frank was there, I was showing David how to break a clinch, and he stopped me. He said, James, don't do that. He's not allowed to break a clinch. This isn't the pros. This is the amateurs. USA Boxing Today, you're not allowed to break the clinch. The referee breaks you, so you go dead. So these guys that were fighting for 10 years in the amateurs after Mayweather and Hopkins, this is how Hopkins kept his longevity. Those guys came up in the 80s where you'd still have a clinch game, where you could clinch, and it was up to the referee's discretion to break it. Like it still isn't the pros. You can still clinch in the pros. You just have to listen to the man when he says you want it broken. These guys, like Mayweather and Hopkins, they get to fight guys who are trained to freeze when you clinch with them and not do anything to get disqualified. So you can pop them once and then clinch with them. I think the smartest thing, which really, one, that degrades boxing. That just makes boxing terrible. Mayweather didn't fight like that when he was lighter. When he was fighting heavier guys, if you look at him fighting Corrales and Gotti, those are masterpieces where he knocked these guys out and he took them apart over the course of the whole fight and destroyed them. He could do that to McGregor if he decides that he wants to have a great fight, but he might decide that he wants to take no risks and then just clinch up with a guy every chance he gets. So if I was training McGregor, I would train McGregor to always deny the clinch. Unlike all of these amateur trained boxers that Mayweather has dealt with, McGregor could defend the clinch at a higher level than any boxer could defend a clinch. So if McGregor can take the beating, he should let Mayweather hit him and count on Mayweather going for the clinch after he gets some shots in because he's trying to win by points, and then deny the clinch.
Okay.
And that should tire this guy out and frustrate him, and then deny the clinch and never throw a counter punch for rounds, for like 2 or 3 rounds. And then once you get him in this groove where he's used to you denying the clinch and not counter punching, then throw a Superman punch, do something crazy, try to catch him, and try to turn it into a mugging.
Okay.
You know, I mean, there's ways he could try to win it, but it's up to Mayweather. Mayweather could say this is going to be a stinker, or this is going to be the best boxing match in 10 years. Because I think because of his size that McGregor could take a good beating from this guy, and Mayweather's got to be careful how he beats the guy up because he's broken his hands before. You know, so I think this could be a great fight. I don't think it will be.
Yeah, I mean, because I know Mayweather pretty much has a lot riding on this, because if he loses to an MMA guy, that's a big stain on his name.
Yeah, so that's probably going to get him to try to make this a 12-round stinker and just outscore the guy, tie him up and everything. In that case, that throws it in McGregor's court. He's, you know... But if you want to look at what Mayweather could do if he wasn't just about the money, you look at his fight against Gotti and his fight against Corrales.
Okay.
Because those are guys that if McGregor is as good a boxer as all of his hype people say he is, then he was as good as those guys who were legitimate top 10 boxers.
Okay.
Okay, so you got a local pro boxer. Okay, so level 1. A journeyman pro boxer, level 2. A top 10 pro boxer, level 3. A top 5 pro boxer, level 4. A titleist, a guy that can win one of the alphabet soup titles, level 5. Level 6, that's a guy that can unify all the titles, that can beat all the titleists. Okay, so if he's what all his hype people say he is in the boxing ring, he's still 3 levels down. And if you remember what it's like, if you're stick fighting a dude, it's like 3 experience levels above you never hit him.
No, you don't.
And it's the same thing. It's the same thing with boxing because it's a range sport. Mm-hmm. A guy could be a goon and kind of make something happen in MMA.
Yeah.
Because a lot of crazy stuff can happen.
Mm-hmm.
But in boxing, if the dude's a couple levels above you, then if he doesn't want to, you're probably not going to hit him.
Okay.
You know, I was trying to get in good enough shape on my last leg to spar with Tony. And I knew I was never going to hit him. I knew that just his reflexes, his eye-hand coordination, because the guy's a pro level motorcycle racer. He was ranked 9th in the country in 8-ball. Okay, so he's got, and he was the best middleweight in Maryland. So they had freakish eye-hand coordination. And he had as much experience as I had, but I was putzing around with amateur guys, and he's going with pro guys. I would have never hit him.
Wow.
Okay? That's it. I would have never hit him. And that's what Mayweather could do. Mayweather could make this fight that he never gets hit. And some of those rounds with the Gotti fight, Gotti never hit him.
Okay.
You know?
All right.
Gotti was so frustrated, Gotti would have rather died. I mean, I think he ended up crying when they stopped the fight. He was just so frustrated he couldn't hit this guy. And Gotti is a guy that was a titleist.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, he had the same trouble with Oscar De La Hoya. He couldn't touch De La Hoya.
Okay.
But De La Hoya was a monster at the weight class they fought because he was so tall. He had this gigantic kid. You could think he could punch.
Okay, so if Mayweather fights like he did in his early days,
then
Conor has no chance.
Well, no, Conor has a chance.
He has a chance.
He has if Mayweather fights like he did in his early days, then Conor has a slim chance of winning on an upset knockout, or a very large chance of winning by a brutal, attritive, stage by stage, break you down and take you apart knockout. Okay, the type of knockout that Mayweather would inflict on him is like the nastiest kind. It's like the career-ending knockout that takes 10 rounds, or it would take him 10 rounds at this point, or at least six. It's at least 6 rounds. You could see if you look at Roy Jones Jr. versus Vinny Pazienza, it's going to be that kind of knockout. If Mayweather did it, but if Mayweather does that, he takes a chance of getting caught. Because he's going to get hit a couple of times.
Yeah. I mean,
and the guy is bigger. The guy can hit. We know he can knock people out. We know he can knock down. I think he knocked down one of the Diaz brothers. And, they have heads like rocks.
Yeah.
So, if Mayweather decides that he's just going to be the money guy, then he could possibly make this a fight where McGregor only hits him like 10 times.
Yeah.
And just makes it completely boring.
God damn, I really hope not.
So it's up to him.
Yeah.
But so far he's been all about perfect record.
Yeah, I mean, man, he can't lose that right now. He can't go out on that. Yeah, I mean, right now I give McGregor between like a 5 and 8% chance of winning, just because of youth.
I think that's reasonable.
Because of youth, reach, size.
Well, I give you an idea of how bad it is.
Yeah.
Mayweather actually went to the best current boxing trainer out there, Freddie Roach, and asked him to train McGregor, and Roach wouldn't do it. Okay, so while they're putting this fight together, if your opponent that you're being lined up to fight actually goes and finds the best trainer in the world and tries to talk him into training you, what does it tell you? It tells you that your opponent is afraid that it's going to look too easy, like he's just beating up somebody that doesn't belong in there with him.
Wow.
And that when I heard that, I was like, Mayweather at least, and he is an intelligent boxer. He's not an intelligent man, but he's an intelligent boxer. Mayweather at least made the assessment that McGregor's not going to be able to touch him unless he has some really top fight preparation. I think he's been McGregor's been sparring with Paulie Malignaggi, who was a good hot shot, like Italian pretty boy boxer a while ago, and still young enough to spar, but is not a guy that would ever I don't think they were fought, but he wouldn't have ever really been able to touch Mayweather.
Wow.
But he would be a good guy for McGregor to spar, just because he'd be the kind of sneaky boxer and quick guy that he probably hadn't dealt with. The whole MMA idea of boxing is cued on the MMA game, and it really misses a lot of points. Trying to take an MMA boxer and make a boxer out of him is pretty tough.
Yeah.
You're better off taking a boxer and training for MMA.
Yeah, because there
was an Irish guy, the Irish hand grenade. He was a good pro boxer, and he was a very successful MMA guy. Never won a title, but there's not that many titles to go around in MMA. At least in the UFC. He fought in the UFC. His fight name was the Irish hand grenade.
Okay. I'd never heard of him.
Yeah, and he was, I think, a welterweight.
Okay. Wow.
And he had a legit pro boxing record, too.
Damn.
Which gave him better hands than pretty much anybody he dealt with in MMA, and he would have to deal with other things.
Whew, wow. No, with that, Jim, we just did about 2 hours.
Okay.
All right. I think this is a good place to end it.
All right, man.
All right. Well, thank you for doing this.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, that was a fun podcast. One thing I forgot to have Jim do at the very end of the podcast was tell how we can get a hold of him. You can find him at jameslafond.com. And to get a hold of me, I'm on Twitter at Roaming Viking, Instagram at The Roaming Viking, and Facebook at Roaming Viking. Thanks, and have a great day.